Blackface is in the news lately, with former Today Show host Megyn Kelly justifying its use. The National Museum of African American History and Culture points out that minstrel entertainment was created by some frustrated white Americans to express the oppression that they felt being members of the majority, but outside of the white norm in society at the time. In donning blackface, these white actors would stereotype and dehumanize African Americans, and doing so, Smith College Associate Professor of History Elizabeth Stordeur Pryor says, sets a dangerous precedent that persists through to today.
I know there's blackface in Shakespeare, but that's not really, what I concentrate on. I really look at United States history, and in the United States, well, there's a stage performance of blackface with really makeup, but it even starts before that. It starts in newspapers, and there'd be these fake letters to the editor. I call it like a literary blackface. So there'd be in newspapers in like the 1780s and 1790s, there'd be fake letters to the editor written by a supposed black person, and that kind of blackface would use like dialect to imitate African Americans who were, drawn as people who were ignorant and dangerous and kind of foolish, and they'd write letters to the editor, in this black dialect, as if somebody would write a letter like that. But it really kind of emerged as the stage performance, as minstrel performance in the U.S. on stages in like the 1820s and 30s.
And in terms of those performances, it was more than simply painting the face. There was music involved. It was something that people would come out to enjoy as a form of entertainment, right?
Right. I mean, the way that I understand it, they're usually interstitial performances. Like, so you'd go to see a play, and when the stage was changing behind the scenes, they would do these interstitial performances that were blackface performances. And then it emerged from that into its own genre of entertainment, and it was minstrel performance and blackface performance, and ultimately Jim Crow, which I can talk a little bit about in a minute, but ultimately those became like the most popular, like the first American pop culture. Like when I'm explaining it to my students, I'm like, this is like Beyonce, but this was in the early 19th century, so imitating black people. And what you would see is a white actor in black makeup wearing torn, tattered clothes, usually using the N-word themselves, because it would try to authenticate black speech, so the speech would be in dialect, and then the person would be, kind of over-sexualized, talk about women in a particular way, talk about politics in a particular way, and kind of be drawn as this dangerous but funny kind of character that would perform on stage.
And so with these white actors putting on this caricature, what was the message that they were sending to their, I would imagine, their largely white audience at that point?
Well, I think like many of the anti-black messages that came out of the 1830s and 1820s and 30s, the message was that black people can never move out of this certain social category. Like, there was Jim Crow, which is one character, but then there was
one of the first characters, right?
Right, exactly.
Because I think today when we hear Jim Crow, we think of Jim Crow laws, but it was a character.
Right. I mean, I write about this in my book, but it was originally a stage character by an actor, T.D. Rice, and he was a white actor, and supposedly he went down to the South. He saw, a black person dancing in this particular way, and he kind of built a character around it that he performed in New York and Boston and throughout the North, and eventually went to England. He eventually brought it to Europe as this like distinctly American art form, and but there was another character too, Zip Coon, and he was like supposed to be like the kind of, I guess what you would say maybe a city slicker, and it was kind of showing how dangerous black freedom could be. And the reason why 1820s and 30s are a pivotal moment of the development of this character is because it corresponds with the moment of black freedom in the North. So that's when there was slavery, and most people, I think, know this, throughout the North. And by the 1827 in New York, that's when all black people were free. It's a longer story than that, but that's where out of which this performance emerges. It's an assault on Black freedom.
So as you're seeing this new freedom for former African-American slaves, and then this other form of performance and sort of social commentary coming from largely white people and performed before white people, how do we then, can we draw a line between those actions and civil rights?
Well, I think that, I think it's a direct attack on equal rights. I think it continues, much like the use of the N-word or these other anti-Black kind of symbols. I think that they exist precisely to signal that Black people aren't worthy of citizenship. And so, making fun of Blackness as if it's one single thing, right? What is Blackness? It's Jim Crow, as opposed to people having lots of different feelings. It flattens, and it makes
being individual people.
Right. It's being human. So it kind of flattens the humanity of African Americans to imagine them in this kind of way and in this performance, and is capable of only one thing.
So we've talked about history rooted in 1830s, and it seems like this thing that was very distant, something in the past. Right. But when you look at film, popular culture, sure. Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, these very famous people who we, kind of hold up as these wonderful actors in our culture, were singing and dancing in blackface in films in the, late 30s, early 40s. And something I read on the Smithsonian's website that just knocked the wind out of me. It said blackface and codifying of Blackness as character persists through to today. And it said that there are, Black Halloween costumes, colleges and universities across the country, and I'm quoting here, continue to battle against student and professor blackface performances. So this is still happening today.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it does happen today. It's happened in local colleges and universities as well. It happens all over. It's not just something, peculiar perhaps to the South, or, it really does happen all over, in which people believe that they can imitate these. And usually, part of the essence of blackface is to imitate these negative stereotypes about African Americans, right? But even so, even if somebody's kind of wants to go as Beyonce for a costume, like the idea that what Beyonce is her blackness, as opposed to all these other kinds of things, like outrageous costumes and all these other things that might signify what looking like Beyonce would be. But the most that somebody can come to is the fact that the blackness of it, and putting on that blackface. And it's surprising to me that people don't know not to do it. That it's not an instinct not to do it. That this isn't funny. It's not the same as, people are like, it's Halloween, but Halloween is really like witches and Dracula and all these kind of ghosts and these, pretend, these figments. And African-American people are not figments. They're actually real human beings. And even though our idea of Halloween has stretched some, it is okay for a white person to go as Obama, for example, but they don't have to go as Obama in blackface, if they want to go as a particular person. But I think it's even worse. We were talking about earlier, one of the things I teach my students is about these Compton Cookouts, or these kinds of, what Compton being an African-American neighborhood in Los Angeles, and what, people are invited to, drink Kool-Aid, eat fried chicken, eat watermelon, to dress like, gangsters, and
the whole list of African-American stereotypes.
Right, exactly. The whole list of African-American stereotypes. And that's really what the core and the essence of is. And I think that people have a hard time. They're like, I didn't mean it that way. I was just putting on a costume. I certainly don't link back to Jim Crow from the 1820s and 30s when I'm doing this. But I think until there really is, social justice and equality, there's no way to step out of that history. So you may think of yourself as an individual person doing something and stepping outside, but I think you're fooling yourself, because you're really still part of this kind of paradigm that's trying to paint African Americans as unworthy and less than. And that's what's funny about the costume.